So can you tell me a little bit about yourself, your name and where you live and work?
So Sean O'Connor, I live in Sydney. I work at Sydney University. I also have my own practice, Mindset Coaching, which doing organisational development and leadership development coaching. Yeah.
Right. And can you say something more about what you do?
Okay, so I teach at the Coaching Psychology unit at Sydney University. I'm also a completing PhD student, so I'm in the final throes of getting that finished, and I do a lot of sort of workplace interventions, mostly around coaching for organisations in my private practice.
Right. And what's your background for doing that?
So my background, I've got a, did you want educational background?
Yeah.
Yep, so I've got an undergraduate psychology degree. Then after that, what did I do? I worked in a lot of organisations as a leader, mostly around IT and then into marketing and things like that. Then later on in life, I went back to education, did the Masters of Coaching Psychology here.
Yeah.
And then I did a year of Masters research after that, and now I've been in the PhD for 3 years, doing research specifically in coaching interventions in organisations.
Right. And do you have training in coaching, not just the program here?
Specific training, well, there's been a lot of weekend workshops and development workshops on specific models or specific theories or specific tools, but they've been wide and varied.
Right.
Yeah.
What about positive psychology? How did you get into that?
So positive psychology, that's interwoven into the coaching psychology degree here. So because I was in the psychology stream, we did a positive psychology subject, and where have I got other information about positive psychology? Mostly from reading in my own research, besides what was included in the course, as well as, let me think, has there been other specific courses? And mostly conferences and things like that, actually. Yeah.
Right. So how long would you say you've been combining coaching and positive psychology?
For about 7 years now. In practice, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, about 7 years.
Right. And the people that you typically coach, who are they?
So the people that I typically coach, that's changed over the years, but at the moment, I get a lot of sort of senior to sort of mid-level to senior level managers.
Yeah.
I get a lot of IT, finance. I also do a lot of senior academic positions, so associate deans and things like that.
Yeah.
So I seem to be getting a lot of work like that lately. A little bit in nursing.
Yeah.
But mostly from team leader up to senior leader level.
Yeah. And what do they want you to help them with? Like, what are the issues or challenges?
Well, issues or challenges. Well, they're not always issues and challenges.
What are they?
Sometimes they just come for development. Right, but it's quite varied. So, let me think. Generally, I tend to get a lot of stuff around stakeholder management, dealing with people who have gone into more senior positions and they're trying to adapt. So a little bit like onboarding.
Yeah.
But it's more about dealing with levels of complexity in a system.
Right.
So I get a lot of sort of strategic thinking, systems level stuff. I've had some communication issues where it's been specific issues that people have come along for. And I also do a fair bit of, and this is a little bit of an aside I guess, but I do a lot of early career, not early career coaching, early coaching supervision for early career coaches.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So coaches that are just starting up.
Yeah.
I tend to do a lot of supervision coaching for those type of people.
Yeah.
So mostly, I guess in summary, so team dynamics, system dynamics, and interpersonal relations seem to be the main focus, and then the broader level of personal development within a leadership context.
Right. And so do you do individual coaching and or group coaching?
I've done some group supervision, but not so much group coaching.
Right.
I do a lot of workshops that include coaching components, but not, I mean, that's a very difficult one to define because it's very poorly defined in the literature as it is at the moment. But group coaching, like, what is that?
Yeah.
So do you mean one person coaching a whole group of people? Do you mean peer supervision coaching where it's facilitated by a senior coach? Or so it's sort of hard to define, but So my take on what you've just said is that it's about coaching a group of people for their individual development or development as a team together. Not very much of that, no.
Right. And what does it look like when you coach people? What happens before you meet them?
Okay, so it will depend largely on the initial purpose, who's contracted it, if it's been brought on, if they've decided to engage in coaching themselves, or if it's been something that's been part of a development program within an organisation and it's organisationally sponsored.
Yeah.
So initially I'll have a meeting with the main sponsor, which is usually the manager and the client or the coachee, and we'll agree broad level goals at that point and sort of how the development of this individual is going to plug into the goals of the organisation or the team or whatever it is. So usually I have some form of three-way initial meeting. That might be to just set the guidelines of what coaching is, what it can do, and what sort of the expectations are, and make sure they're shared across all individuals involved. Sometimes that might even include a HR person, so it could be 3 or 4 people sometimes. After that, I would usually have a more formal three-way with the manager, the coachee, and myself to discuss more of the specifics of what we'll be looking at in the coaching program. So not necessarily what we'll be working on specifically, not the content, but more about, so what are the objectives, what are the outcomes, what sort of behaviour would you expect us to see change if it's behavioural, if it's behaviourally based, and sort of get a broad agreement on what that is, and then I would start working one-on-one with the client, and then we would shape that up, those broad level agreements, to fit in with the personal context of that individual.
Yeah.
So there's like almost 3 levels of shaping or specificity development.
So the 2 first levels, are they 2 separate meetings or the same day and the...
Sometimes they're the same day, sometimes they're separate meetings, sometimes there's only the second version, right? If all the contracting stuff has been done on the email and there isn't a need for that much involvement from HR or other people who are interested, then I might just, particularly if you've been working with the manager with other people previously, they sort of know how you work and they've got that set, you've got that relationship built. Yeah. If that's already set up, I would usually just have the three-way. It's usually about a half an hour meeting, and then we set the broad outlines for what the expectations are over the coaching engagement. Right. So did you want me to go through
so what happens between that meeting and the first session then?
So between that meeting and the first session, it would usually finalise the contract stuff so that it includes some outline of what the goals are. Then that agreement's finalised, and then we start up.
And what happens in the first session?
In the first session, so we've already established what coaching is about with the client. They've got a clear understanding and agreement contractually around the three-way relationship between us and their manager. That's all been set. Yeah. We've got that agreed. So then we focus specifically on our goal development processes. So it's about, given the broad outline of what we've agreed to work on, how does that come across to you specifically? How will you know that the coaching has been effective? How can we get to some sort of goal statement that we can work towards over the period? Now that might not mean that we stay to that specific goal. It depends what develops over time. Sometimes you might not actually get to the specific goal for the whole period in the first session. It just really depends on what stage of change that individual is at, what sort of level of development they're at, and really how the specific needs that were set up initially. Yeah. For example, if it's just about general development in order for this person to be able to handle greater responsibility in a new position and broader level strategic stakeholder management type work because of a new position they've gotten, then you might not get the goal for a few sessions because there's a lot of clarification and clarity building and and engagement work that needs to go on before it really becomes clear. You might set something generally, but that will gain clarity as you start working together and find out what the best approach is for that person's development, or what the best form of development is for that person. Right.
And what then happens? Yeah. What happens after that?
So what happens after that? Well, lots of things can happen after that. So we just start working together.
And how do you do that?
So there's lots of different ways.
Do you have a process you follow, or structure, or?
I really have a sort of beginning structure and an ending structure. The middle part is quite flexible. So it would be basically, okay, so a couple of things to set some guidelines, I guess, is I usually don't coach for less than 8 sessions, right? And usually fortnightly. Is this the sort of information that you're looking for? Yeah. So this is very just process specific. So I don't like to work for less than 8 sessions, just because I feel that it takes time, particularly with a new client that you might, if you've worked with them in the past, previously, then it can probably be shorter. But I think that if you want to get real behavior change or perspective development or some real significant differences, it does take a bit of time to build that up. Yeah. So I'm not really a believer in 4 sessions, cram it in and away you go, because you're talking about significant personal development most of the time, and that requires often a change of perspective or behavioural change or even cognitive change in some sense. So that is not something you can rush into, because it won't, I don't think it will stick if you are forced to rush into it. So I usually have about 8 sessions minimum, sometimes longer, and I would meet fortnightly at the beginning. I might stretch that out to monthly depending on what's happening for that client as we start getting into the change process. If they're managing their own development externally, then I lengthen the time that we have contact together.
Yeah. And so when you say you have a beginning structure and end structure,
yeah.
And is that end of engagement or end of each session?
End of engagement.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So there is a sort of end of session structure as well. Well, I always have some. One of the things that I think is important in coaching is that if you're only doing stuff together in a session, that's not enough. There needs to be something that is integrating what you learn together or find out together into the real world that that person's working into.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a lot of people think about the grow model and all that type of thing. Loosely, I might use some of them aspects during a coaching session. One of the things that I often stick to is that there will be, I mean, Tony and others have called it homework, but there will be things to do.
Yeah.
Experiments to make, processes to go through, where that person takes what you've agreed to together, what you've found out together from the session, tries it out in the real world, or is even just gathering data in order to inform the developmental process that you're going through together in the sessions. So in terms of session structure, the start is all about reviewing that in some way. What did you learn from the exercises that we agreed to last time that they've come up with? If there was specific action plans, how did they go? What worked? What didn't work? What could we do differently? And then it will be moved into the more general discussion of what's happening for that person and what are we doing now with that information to move closer to the agreed outcome or developmental process that we're working towards. And then at the end there will be getting agreement around what it is they need to do for next time that we meet.
Right.
And this is not something that would be set by me. It'll be something that has come out of the conversation that we've agreed to. It might be framed up. I might chuck an extra thing in there somewhere if I think it's relevant for the case conceptualization that we've made together of that process of development and how it's going to help them towards the long-term goals.
Yeah.
So that's the structure general. It's not always exactly like that, but generally. And then over the whole engagement, if it's corporately sponsored or there's another sponsor, I would have a 3-way meeting at the end to wrap things up. The session prior to that is about a review of what we've learned over the process, what that person thinks has worked best for them, what skills, techniques or processes they're going to use for themselves going on, and then planning for that continual change, because I don't think the change often, if it's high level complex developmental change in some way, it doesn't end with the coaching session. No. Really the coaching engagement. The coaching engagement is about setting that person up in order for them to get the skills to use themselves to continue that lifelong developmental process. and that final session is usually about reviewing what's worked over the whole engagement, getting a clear picture, case conceptualization or understanding of what's gone on and what's worked best for them, and then planning together what they're going to do for themselves, how they can get support from the external environment, what triggers can they put in place in order to review intermittently how they're tracking on that, so that the change doesn't stop when the coaching ends.
Can you say something more about the triggers that can...
Oh, well, that's just a little tool, I guess, or technique of setting up things like, it depends what's specific for that person, but reminders to reflect on the process that they've gone through before, or trigger points in the future for, like, maybe it's sending themselves a letter from the future or something like that. Whatever is relevant and whatever has come out of how we've learned about each other,
yeah,
whatever's come out of that they can use, that will work to remind them that they are still on that continual change process.
Yeah, yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah. Okay, so that's that, and then there would be another three-way with the sponsor, reviewing what we've done, how it's worked, what's worked best, what they can do to support the continued development of that individual, and specifically in an organisational context this is. And I think that's good because you gain, first you gain a perspective on what the manager or leader of this person has seen change,
yeah,
right? Which gives that external view, which can be reinforcing for that individual,
yeah,
because often it's difficult for them to recognise the positive change themselves. They can see it and you've been helping them identify it, but having someone else verify that also, and they might notice different things that you can't notice in the relationship. So building that process is also about building an ongoing relationship structure that supports them into the future. So you're engaging the leader in that process as well, so they're required to support it to a degree. They also feel more involved, and you can include them in the ongoing action planning or developmental planning process for that individual, and get some feedback on what they've seen change.
Yeah, yeah.
And wrap it all up.
And you mentioned the case conceptualization.
Yeah.
Can you say something more about how you use that?
Okay, so case conceptualization generally is just about an understanding, a theoretically based understanding of what's going on for that individual. So there can be different types of case conceptualization, but some of the important things I think are about what you do with it, because you can have lots of different types of case conceptualization. You'll usually have a type that it's a way of putting the data together. Now that I think where it becomes more technically advanced is when you're using that with the client and filling in those gaps together, so that there's a shared understanding of what's going on for them, what parts of their condition, if you will, I'm not sure what else to call it, but their situation and the relationships between those different components, that's informed by some theoretical underpinning that makes sense for that situation. But if you share it and it's explicit, the other person can see specifically what's going on for them, and they've contributed to it, they own it better, and they're more likely to work towards motivated change, given that they've contributed to that understanding.
Yeah. So practically, how do you do it?
So I can probably give some examples. There's lots of different ways to do it, but so a coach who's had a lot of theoretical or has, I'm not sure if it's just for people with psychological background, I'm sure lots of coaches do it, but there's a sort of process of mentally sticking together bits that make sense of that person's experience.
Yeah.
So how would I do it? Often it would be a process of drawing circles, making connections, but the things that you put in those circles are sort of not the specifics, but what type of circles you put down are often informed by the theory. So for example, if you're thinking, okay, there's a lot of automatic negative thoughts here, there's a lot of sort of maybe disorganized thinking or thinking patterns that are getting in the way of this person doing what they need to do. So then it might be a a cognitive behavioral case conceptualization, because given that the thoughts seem to be the thing that's getting in the way, there's ways you can change behavior and change those thoughts using those theoretical techniques. So you'll be looking for what thoughts lead to other thoughts, what situations lead to those thoughts, what are the emotions that emerge because of those thoughts, when is it not happening, when is it happening, and that's the sort of, and you might ask those questions as you're drawing connections between them on a piece of paper or something like that.
And so do you draw on the piece of paper, or do they do it, or do you do
Bit of both.
Right.
Yeah.
So they will be able
Sometimes I do it up on a whiteboard, it just depends what facilities you have.
Right. Okay.
And so the reason I do that is because I want to check that I'm putting together the bits that are important, because the other person is more likely to know the important bits.
Yeah.
I add the underpinning theory that's making sense of the case conceptualization, and I might explain that a little bit given the relevance to that individual, and then we create what's in the boxes together.
Right.
And that will allow us to identify points of possible change, different strategies for change, and then we can apply different tools as needed depending on the depending on the agreed case conceptualization. So sometimes you might put it down, you've got these ideas in your head on what makes sense for this situation, start putting it down and you've got it all wrong. If I kept it in my head, I wouldn't know that I've got it all wrong. So the process of doing it that way is also about checking my understanding and allowing them to contribute their expertise in their own life onto that case conceptualization as well.
Yeah.
So that experience of engaging is good because it builds a relationship. It also engages them in the process of understanding themselves in a different way, and that allows them to sometimes to unlock hidden resources or to see potential opportunities for change that they might not have seen previously.
Yeah.
But you need to be willing to adapt your theory and be wrong and change it if you get feedback from that individual that you're getting it all wrong.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of early coaches fall over.
Can you say something more?
So they might have particular theories or models that they tend to stick to quite a lot, that they're more comfortable with, and if that person's understanding of themselves doesn't fit into that model and they try to stick to it too tightly, then they'll lose the motivation for change for that other individual.
Yeah.
So holding too tightly onto your case conceptualization can can stunt the change.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Right. What about assessments? Do you use assessments?
Yes and no. Not all the time, but it depends on if the assessment is going to serve a purpose. Sometimes organisations have assessments already in place and they want you to use them as part of the process. I would usually agree to do that, but I tend to adapt them. For example, a lot of corporates will have leadership engagement surveys or leadership questionnaires that they put out intermittently, or team engagement surveys. I would usually look at them and take out pieces that are directly relevant to that, sit with the overall broad goal that we've set in that three-way meeting.
Yeah.
And say, so okay, if you want to use this tool, these are the parts of the tool that are relevant for what we're doing. So if you want to use it to judge change, then we'll do a pre-post and look at that. So what other assessments do I use? So I've used the PANAS, Positive Negative Affect Scale, a multi-factor leadership questionnaire, three other 360s, I think it's the OCI or something, can't remember what it's called, and sometimes I use values and strengths, signature values and strengths, Seligman's, if it is that the case is about identifying values and the need to build on strengths.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say that I use a set. I often look for new assessments too, given a specific need.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes assessments are overused.
Yeah.
And they're used just for the sake of the assessment. If the assessment is a measure, it's used to measure something.
Yeah.
Right? It's not the thing.
Mm-mm.
The thing is the change. So if the assessment is going to help the change, then use it, but otherwise it's only there to measure stuff.
Yeah.
Does it make sense?
Yeah,
Is
that's
that too rambling?
No. I used to work for SHL. We had to use their tests whenever we had new clients, and
sometimes they're just not suitable, right?
No.
Yeah.
So, how did you use the PANAS?
So, positive and negative affect scale. I've used it a number of times when there's been maybe some feedback around positivity, mostly, not really on the negativity side, but around the contributes of the positive emotions that happen in a team. And we'll see if that shifts based on, are they creating a more positive atmosphere through their interactions with others in the team that they're working with. But that was specifically, that one that I'm thinking of in my head now, was specifically because they'd had feedback that there was a very negative sort of environment in their team. They wanted to change that. We actually did measures not with just that person, but with the team as well. Through the leader though, it wasn't something that I did, they did themselves. I just helped them with the process and then looked at the data, and then we said, okay, so what are the strategies we can use to change the positive experience of the people in this environment.
Right. And the VIA, how did you use that one last time you used it?
Okay, so I've used it, the last time I used the VIA was specifically because, now let me try and recall, so that situation was, I just want to make sure I protect confidentiality as well. There was it was to look at identifying different ways of interacting with other people and what strengths that they could use within the organisational context that they were working within. So this person had difficulty seeing some of the strengths that they had. So it was really a process, partly because doing the questionnaire starts them thinking about different strengths. Secondly, as a conversational point, to talk about strengths and how they see those strengths appear in the work that they do, and then to leverage how can we use more of this for the things that you're finding difficult in the organisation at the moment, some of the relationship building stuff and things like that, and also how and also to get examples of other people of when they'd use those key strengths. So we use it as a key feedback leverage point, because this person had difficulty seeing when they were doing things well. There was an overly negative perspective on the things that I do wrong, or on a focus mostly on weaknesses. So it was about trying to turn that perspective around. There was other cognitive behavioural stuff we did as well, but that was one tool that helped with that.
So when people do fill out the PANAS or the VIA, do they do that in the session or before the session?
Before or in between sessions.
Right. And so do they send you the result or do they bring it?
Usually send, but sometimes bring.
And so when the session starts, what do you do?
So we might just review it, and I'd ask questions about their experience doing it. I'd also ask for specific behavioural examples of when they might see they've used these key strengths, or what strengths do they think they're not getting an opportunity to use enough of in whatever context we're working within, and then we might use it to start building strategies to use more of those strengths.
Right. What about intervention?
So mostly it's a talking point.
Yeah,
and it's data about what that person could be doing differently or could be doing more of.
Yeah. What about interventions? Do you use positive interventions?
So I've used a number, so gratitude diaries, reflecting on the positive of the day, that type of thing. See, the definition is tricky. I mean, so where do you draw the line? What's a positive intervention? Is cognitive behavioural remodelling, is that a positive intervention? I'm not sure it is, but some people might say it is, but really it comes from clinical usage. So specifically hope interventions, so looking at pathways thinking, but is that really a tool or an intervention, or is it an application of a theory? So I think that
can you say what application of a theory? Can you say something more?
So hope theory is about pathways thinking and the motivation to success, to achieving the goal. So there's two different areas you can work on to try and build hope, and there's been evidence to show the benefits of high hopers, right?
Yeah.
We don't have to go into all of that. So you can focus on the pathways or the motivation to success and the self-efficacy of using the pathways, right?
Yeah.
So that's a theory, but the intervention falls out of the theory. You just build more pathways, right? You ask questions about pathways, develop more options to the goal. All that stuff is integrated into the coaching process without actually being a specific, okay, we apply the intervention now.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Through, if you're building options and looking for multiple pathways, you're already integrating hope theory into your process.
Yeah.
So are you using the intervention now, or are you just coaching?
Yeah.
It's very, like, the boundaries are very blurry.
Yeah, yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're doing a gratitude diary,
yeah,
it sort of says that is very specific. I'm using a positive psychology tool now.
Yeah.
Off you go into your gratitude diary.
Right. And when you use interventions or integrate them, just
Yeah.
or they are integrated in the way that you work, how do you do it? Like, how do you introduce it?
Well, firstly, you shouldn't use intervention for the intervention's sake. It has to be relevant, and I think the case conceptualization, it underpins what interventions will work and what won't work, or what are best to use. So how would I explain it? Is that what the question was?
Yeah, so what would happen? So you'd have a conversation and then suddenly you get an idea about an intervention.
Yeah. So usually I explain what the intervention is about in some way. I also explain how it contributes, how it fits in with the case conceptualization that we've come up with, and then also how they can apply it, use it, and what are the benefits for their overall goal. So it needs to be clearly linked, because you can just, if you just say, okay, I think we should do a letter from the future. Okay, so you should go and review your values, make sure you include the values in your letter and how you're living those values, and higher order goals, and write a letter back to yourself from 5 years time or whatever it is, and then we'll have a look at it and see how that feels, right? That's using positive psychology intervention. But if I say that we're doing a letter from the future, the reason why this might work is because it will reinforce your understanding of the things that are important to you. We've been trying to build motivation towards these goals, so if you understand them from a reflective process, you review them in a different light, and then it will give you an understanding of what these things mean to you in a different way.
Yeah.
Right? So that's explaining how the intervention connects to the purpose for that individual, and how it fits into the theory of the situation that you two have built together.
Yeah.
Yeah? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the person does the exercise, what happens then?
So the person does the exercise, then it depends on the exercise, but what usually happens then is that we talk about it in the next session, work to find out if they had any difficulty with it. Do we need to adjust the exercises a little bit? If it's an ongoing exercise, like a gratitude diary or something like that, are they noticing change? What sort of things are they recognizing? If the data is important for ongoing change, then it's about bringing that back and discussing it. So for example, if you're identifying situations that trigger an anger response, for example, if you've got someone that has difficulties with, they tend to be a little bit too aggressive with their staff or something that they've identified through feedback. Yeah. And they've wanted to change that, and you send them out there, okay, notice different situations where this happens, what were you thinking before, what was going on, doing that data gathering, then you would go through it more specifically around, okay, how does this fit into our model of change, what are the things we can do to change the situation. It's a very cognitive behavioural example. Change the situation, change the thinking that happened prior, or change the behaviour through some behavioural change process, depending on what data comes back.
Right, yeah. What about knowledge sharing? Do you share your knowledge?
Yes, I'm sharing it now. No, how do I share my knowledge with the clients? Yeah. So we've talked a lot about sort of individual, iterative behaviour change mostly. I think that, but when I'm doing a lot of the work around developing systems thinking, I tend to share a lot more knowledge there. I also share the knowledge, as I've said, so they understand how the processes connect with the theory and the understanding that we've got. I share it enough so that they can understand why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
And so they can look out for the right things. That adds that sense of meaning and purpose to it as well, so it increases that engagement. But also, I might share, if it's specifically around how do I manage my team better, or how do I go about developing others, then I'll be more specific around the coaching techniques that have helped in our conversation that they could then use with their individuals. When there's a sort of learn to coach type aspect, to not specifically, but I want to develop others, then you'd be more specific about it. But the way, again, I think you can run into trouble if you try to explain every single thing that you do. You should only share the knowledge if it's going to help them with their overall goal in some way, and in a way that is relevant to their situation.
Yeah.
With the systems thinking stuff, I tend to, because it's quite different, I tend to share more of it so it makes sense to them and it helps develop that perspective.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And when do you know when to ask question and when to ask or tell something? Or how do you know?
So I would think that most of the time it's asking and summarizing and putting things together with the person. When do I tell? When it's about, so I'm telling when my expert knowledge in coaching and change intervention and leadership is relevant. So they're the experts in terms of their world, of what happens in their organization. But if they want to learn about leadership theory because that could help them in what they do, then I might tell them more about the relationship between these things.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is that what you were asking?
Yeah. Yes. And what about flexibility, adapting to the client, to the context, the culture? You mentioned something about stages of change.
So flexibility, stages of change. Well, I think. So are you talking specifically about a model of stages of change? Or?
No, you just mentioned it before that the people could have different stages when they come in.
See, one of the really great things about coaching is that you can be really flexible, and that's why I enjoy it so much. I mean, you learn as much from the clients that they learn from you, I think.
Yeah.
Because they're mostly learning from themselves anyway. So it's about you engaging in that, and I think flexibility is a core process because you need to adapt your approach to what works best for them. It's not about you telling them what they need to do in order to change. It's about you identifying what's working for this person, what's not working, and then adapting your approach and being able to let go of your assumptions in a way that helps them build the strategies for changing themselves. So flexibility is probably the core, and I think to be able to be more flexible, firstly you need to be more comfortable in trust in the process. Be comfortable that you can adapt to change, get comfortable with that ambiguity of not knowing what's next, and be willing to adapt in the moment to that. But if you've got a strong theoretical an evidence-based background that sits in the back of your mind, and you keep up to date and are reviewing that all the time and doing a lot of reflection around what is the situation for this person. This is inside and outside of the coaching. What theories might I bring to the table that could be relevant, could be helpful? If you're continually doing that, that allows you to be more flexible and gives you the opportunity to adapt more.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So flexibility is a core. Are there other cores you would point out?
So flexibility, comfortable with ambiguity, high-level listening skills. So the very basics of listening techniques, reflective listening, summarizing, all that stuff. I think you need to be, I guess, at least for my model of how I am as a coach, that's very important.
Yeah.
What else? So what else? So listening, case conceptualization, and the way you do that, that links to your understanding of the evidence and the theory to support whether it's positive psychology, clinical psychology, or other change processes and motivation processes in the literature. You've got a strong understanding of that that allows you to be more flexible.
All right. Can you tell me something about expectations, your expectations and the client's expectations, and how you kind of create positive expectations for outcome?
Okay, so I think we've covered a little bit of it already in terms of the goal setting process and the agreement and contracting process.
Yeah.
So that sets an expectation of how we're going to work together. I also get agreement not just on what is the content, what are we working towards, but also like how we will work together.
Yeah.
So what they can expect of in terms of my behavior as a coach and what I would expect of them as well.
Yeah.
And I think this builds a way to check in with the process as you're going through the engagement.
Yeah.
So they can expect of me to be supported. There's a whole ream of things that I give to them, and I would expect that they try the things that we agree for them to try, that they're open with me to discuss new things, that they're open to any challenges that I might put their way, or if I challenge some assumptions, that they can expect that.
Yeah.
So a lot of the agreement around not just what we will work towards, but also how we will work together in that process.
Yeah.
I think that sets clear expectations. Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah. What about your relationship with the client? Do you do something to establish it and maintain it?
I mean, it's hard to be clear exactly a specific approach that works in every case, but there is a lot about building rapport and trust. So what do I do? The listening skills and the process of reflective listening helps engagement and rapport, I think. So I'm very careful to set that up early on. But there's different things within that work for different people. And especially if you're working with people from different fields or different areas, if you've got highly technical or academic individuals, the reflective communication processes I find don't necessarily work as well as they would with people in more social settings in the workplace. So they have a different methodology that builds rapport to them, and then you need to adjust how you build rapport with these people. So then it's more about delivering and commitment and making sure that you provide what you say you're going to provide and reinforce that relationship through that connectedness. Yeah. So that connectedness doesn't necessarily come through the communication with some people, whereas it does with others. So you need to try and gauge feedback from the physical response of the individual and how they're engaging in the process, and work out, am I building rapport in the appropriate way? If not, what can I do to adjust how I build rapport so that that trust can be gained?
Right, and how would you find out?
Just by asking questions, by being very upfront. See, a lot of the time we talk about content and what we're doing and what's happening out in the real world in the coaching session, but you can also talk about what's happening in the relationship. So am I communicating in a way that's effective for you? Do I need to be working differently in order to help you get to where you need to get to? What are you noticing that's working in how we're working together? Is there anything we need to change? So have those check-in points around, are we working the right way together? Yeah. And what is it that you would change if you could change something? Those type of questions that can help you talk about the relationship rather than just talking about the content, and then work out a different process of relating together. Right. And as long as you've got a little bit of rapport, you'll usually get quite strong engagement in that, because it's like another level of perspective. You're not just talking about what's happening, you're talking about how we want stuff to happen. Yeah. So the process of relating to, we need to do that differently. Right. So if you get a sense, and I guess it is a sense that they're maybe sort of not engaging in some of the questions that you ask, they might be giving short responses, or they're maybe not doing some of the homework tasks, so you get a feel is like maybe this is not going the way it should be that's most helpful for that person. So having that check-in point and finding out what you can do differently for them so it starts to work for them again. Yeah. Because if you just steamroll ahead and continue going with the process that's not working, then you're going to get to the end and it won't have worked.
Yeah.
So trying to pick up on those cues that can either be in the way they hold themselves, the visual facial cues, body posture and behavior, as well as the behavior and engagement in the overall process, can tell you that maybe things aren't going as well as they could be.
Yeah.
And having that check-in point and seeing if things can be done differently.
Right. And what do you do to help clients stay engaged?
So, well, the check-in points help stay engaged as well, because you're noticing and picking things up before they fall too far off. What else do I help? I continually tie back any of the goals to important strengths and values. I tend to do that a fair bit. So, like, remember before I explaining why this intervention is important for the goal and how it fits in with their purpose.
Yeah.
That's also a process of continuing their engagement. So if you think of higher level or multi-layers of goals, if you're connecting what we're doing at the very lower level of the goal hierarchy with the higher hierarchy of what's important for them at the value level,
yeah.
then they seem to engage. They continually engage. That's why we're doing this.
Right.
Gratitude diary, because it's important for me that I connect with my family or whatever it is that they're talking about.
Right.
So continually checking in with, are we making sure we understand the broader, higher level purpose that we've identified, not that I've decided, that we've identified together.
Yeah.
And is that still right? Doing that helps to continue the engagement,
right.
I think, or reinforcing engagement.
Right. And do you do something between the sessions? You would give them homework, assignments? Does other thing happen? And
yep.
do other things happen?
Lots of stuff happens. So there's the stuff that they might do out in their workplace, and maybe some reflective exercises on the coaching session. Also, I would have my own reflection around the case conceptualization, how I'm making sense of this person and their situation. I would also often have coaching supervision of myself, where I would take difficult clients. When I say difficult clients, I don't mean difficult clients, but tricky situations, I guess you might label them, or ethical issues, boundaries that you want to test out with someone else. I have a coaching supervisor that helps me do that. So that's also about reflecting on my cases, but also reflecting on my own development as a coach and how I'm putting together my understanding of me as a coach across all of the cases that I'm working on. So that's about developing a case conceptualization, really about myself as a coach.
Right.
So I'll do that through my own reflective practice, reflecting on each session and reflecting across all sessions, and then also sharing that either in group peer supervision or one-on-one supervision, which is focused on my development individually and how that my coaching experience ties into that.
Right. And when your clients come back and they say, "Oh, this was really helpful," are there things that they typically point to?
Yeah, I think there's been some research to show that what the coach thinks is most useful actually is often different to what the coachee thinks works the best. So it's a tricky one to answer, but the space for reflection, I think, is one of the main things that seem to come up, because they live these very busy, hectic lives, and they've got 1 hour in a fortnight where they can actually just think things through and have someone who's committed to tying their thoughts to their own development. I think so often I get feedback that just having that space to share ideas and develop them differently. Also, the opportunity for an external perspective or a different perspective that might challenge some of their assumptions.
Yeah. That
works well. And also just the continued motivation and positive regard and support through when they're going through challenging, tough situations or processes.
Yeah.
What else? Let me have a think about that for a second. What else? I mean, there's often you get feedback on specific techniques that they've found really beneficial as well, but that can be very individual. But if I think about the process as a whole, they would probably be the main themes, and also the understanding of how things connect together for them. So I think the sharing of the case conceptualization really works. I've had a fair bit of feedback on that. Yeah.
Right. How can you tell when they're progressing?
How can you tell when they're progressing? Well, you have to have some objective. You might have some objective measures in the system that they're working in that can help you tell that progress. You might have them gather feedback on the change that people have seen. You might notice differences in their behaviour in the session, how they're holding themselves, their confidence. It really depends on what the goal is for that individual. But I mean, progress can be monitored in a lot of different ways, but if you can get specific quantifiable data, then it's much easier to do. But often it doesn't show up the full gamut of the change experience.
Right.
So noticing change and identifying that, and have them reflect on what's working differently in the system, and sharing that with you helps you to monitor that, but also sharing that with you helps them to also notice it.
Yeah. Because
the noticing of the positive change is a change intervention in itself.
Yeah.
So I am doing better now. I have achieved this stuff.
Yeah.
That builds motivations.
And you said gather feedback?
Yeah.
Can you say something about that?
Okay, so there's the formal part where it's happened with the manager, pre and post. They also might reflect with trusted individuals in the organisation.
Yeah.
I've had people develop strategies with me where they've have a regular catch up on specific behavioural or specific scenario-based scenario-based situations where they're asking, so how did I go in that meeting?
Yeah.
What did you notice that was different? Did you notice anything, a change in my approach?
Right.
So they might be actually specifically gathering data from other people around their behaviour, if it's behaviour-based.
Right. And when they're experiencing progress, what do you think are some of the effective factors or causal mechanisms?
I think there's a lot of things that make it work, and it can be very individual for what works for what person. But I think the iterative nature of the change process and having an external perspective to help you notice that change helps you build on the change that's occurring as you go along. Do you understand what I'm saying? So I think that's one of the things that works, is that sort of cycle of self-regulation where they're noticing what's working and they're adapting and changing continually. That's part of the thing that drives it on. Having a connectivity with their sense of purpose or meaning with the change that they're trying to enact also helps to drive the continuing motivation for change as they're moving through the process, and having touch points that remind them of that connection, which should be reflected in the case conceptualization that you've agreed together and have formed together. I think they're the sort of things that help to, can help it continue.
And other things?
I think when people start to see observable change in the system around them, it becomes like an intrinsic reward for continued behaviour change. When they notice that actually meetings are getting better, people are engaging more and it's more collaborative, like if that's been some focus of the coaching, and then that becomes like a self-fulfilling cycle where the positivity in the system is reinforcing the change that they're trying to enact, and that's feeding on itself and causing continued change around them. I think that can sometimes be an important factor. And also, if the system supports that change, it can be very hard if someone is trying to enact serious level change and then they don't have the structures in the system to support them in some way, or there isn't an ability for you to create those structures. Usually there is at some level, but if change is resisted in the system, it can be much harder for that individual.
Yeah.
So it might be a factor that they're not sharing their change, or that it's a sort of culture of resistance that's in an organisation, and how the sort of strategies that you need to help them create in order to protect them from that pushback so they can continue to change, it becomes a bit trickier.
And so you mentioned sharing their change. Can you say something about that?
So that might be about gaining positive support from their environment by engaging with trusted individuals around, these are the development I'm going through, these are the things that I'm going to change. I'm happy to, it would be good to get some feedback or support through that process. General sort of change strategy type stuff.
And protection against pushback, what do you do to do that?
Someone's trying to be less antagonistic in meetings, but the way meetings are set up by the system and how everyone engages in meetings is very antagonistic in itself. So what you might need to do, and so that behaviour might be rewarded by the system in some way. So it's very hard to try and change within that when it's rewarding the exact opposite to that change. So what you might have to do is set up other reward strategies external to the system that allow the reinforcement of the new behaviour, or find a different way to not be punished for that behaviour within the system. So it's very hard to be very specific unless you've got a specific example. But it might be about getting reinforcement outside the system.
Yeah.
Putting triggers to identify when the new behaviour has worked well, and contrast them with the rewards that the system is providing for the negative behaviours that you're trying to change away from. Different strategies like that, but you need to have some context in order to find out what might work.
Right. Okay. What about your development? You mentioned supervision. What else do you do to develop as a professional?
So because I'm teaching this stuff as well, I'm always looking at research. I'm at a lot of conferences. I do research in the area as well. So I'm always looking and keeping on top of what's happening as much as I can. I try to use strategies for myself in my own life with the things that I do. Supervision helps me to gain an external perspective on my process as a coach, and also find new ways and more complex ways to case conceptualize and understand coaching engagements. I also read horrendous amounts of material, and I'll go to workshops occasionally. I've cut back on the workshops while I finish the PhD, but otherwise I tend to be engaged in lots of new stuff that I think will be helpful.
Right. And when you learn something new, how does it get integrated into the way that you work?
So that's an interesting question actually, and I find that often it takes a little while you get comfortable with the process. I will try and test things out when they seem relevant. A good example is I went on a training program a year or two ago, probably more than that now, a subject-object interview process, which is a developmental interviewing process to understand someone's stage of development. Now it takes about an hour and a half to do an interview, and then you have to code it and really look in depth, so it takes about 3 or 4 hours in total.
Yeah.
Now I don't do whole subject-object interviews with people, but I'll use some of those questioning techniques to get a sense of an order of mind and stage of development that someone might be at, because that might inform the case conceptualization and inform some of the strategies that I might apply if their context requires some change in that area.
Yeah.
Right? So, again, it needs to be context specific, but when I do find out something new, I try to use it a few times initially, as soon as I can,
Yeah.
to try and embed it a little bit.
Right.
I also tend to connect it with other theories. Like I have a mind map of theory and intervention stuff where I try and look at the relationships with different theories so I can get a more complex understanding of how they overlap. So that will give me a more fluid way to use them in the coaching process. If I understand how they connect to the stuff that I already use, for example.
Okay, can you say something more about that? I don't have that, so I...
Okay, so for me it's just a mind map in order to see connections between different theories or different models and different techniques.
So what could be an example of part of the mind map?
Okay, so for example, there's relationships between Prochaska and Clement's stages of change model and the cycle of self-regulation.
Yeah.
Right? You can see connections between how that helps change slowly in minute cycles, while the change process at a broader level goes through pre-contemplation, contemplation, all those levels of change, right? So you can see connections there. If you think about self-regulation is about building, the cycle of self-regulation is about building new strategies to change things, right, and do things differently. You can see how hope theory overlaps onto that, because hope theory says that if we've got more strategies and more pathways to our goals, we're more likely to achieve them.
Yeah.
So you can self-regulate through those different pathways as you try them all.
Yeah.
So they're connected there as well.
Yeah.
Right. So how different, and then you can think of, so if you're thinking of the subject-object interview and Keegan's orders of mind, you might be thinking about how that relates to systems theory and how that connects with the understanding that the local interactions of individuals lead to emergent properties of a system. How you engage in that system and how you understand that system could be informed by your stage of mind. So you might be thinking about, okay, am I part of the group? Am I always someone who's self-authored? How I interact in that system? You can see that there might be some connections or relationships between those theories. So if I get a new idea or a new theory or a new process, I try to connect it to as many things that I already understand well, and that allows me to integrate it quicker into the coaching process.
And you do that explicitly by sitting with your mind map and writing it on it? Or?
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, I have a digital mind mapping program, but
Right.
I use that just to help organise ideas.
Right, okay.
I wouldn't do it all the time, but a lot of the time, and I might review things after a while and look at how it's changed. It just helps me to organise ideas.
Yeah. What would you say is special about positive psychology, if anything? Like, would the way that you work look different if you didn't know anything about positive psychology?
I mean, it's a good label for stuff. I mean, it's helped us look at things a bit differently, I think. And it's an emerging field where we're still developing a lot of our understanding. A lot of the stuff has already been there, though, but we've grouped it together differently. So I think, in that sense, it's helped us to apply some existing theories to a new process of change in terms of coaching and also in terms of positive development, rather than just fixing things that are wrong, working towards betterment. I think by having the a label of positive psychology on that, it's helped to gain interest and garner effort towards filling some of the blanks in that area. So, but what is special about it? I think the special about it is that forward focus, future perspective, and the potential for improvement, and that frame of reference or the frame of thinking that comes with that is a good thing for people in general. When we're thinking about all the complex problems that we're faced with in the world today, standard practice probably isn't going to solve them. So high performance and the potential for betterment, if positive psychology can contribute to that, then I think that's a good thing.
And is that different from what was already in the coaching? It also had the future perspective and betterment and stuff?
Coaching psychology and positive psychology I see as very married together. I mean, in many ways, coaching is just the application of positive psychology, but it also brings in other things as well, from the clinical space, supervision space, all these other theories of motivation, learning, development and change. Whereas positive psychology doesn't necessarily include all of them. So I think that it adds a label to the new category of stuff that's the more the things that enhance. Right. But coaching psychology uses that as well as some of the clinical stuff, cognitive behavioral theory, leadership change, all the things that we've known that are sort of in the back and middle space.
Yeah.
But positive psychology adds the sort of betterment side of things.
Right.
I really do think it's just a grouping of things that have already exist, but also an advancement of them under that grouping. Does that
it makes sense.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Are there things we have not talked about that are important to understand the way that you work?
Yeah, there's Probably a few. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I've been doing lately, specifically with the research I've been working on, which has been relevant to how I've started to work a bit differently with clients. I've always been fascinated by systems theory and complex adaptive systems, and helping people develop systems theory is sometimes some of the work that I do. I've been using social network analysis as a process for understanding systems in their complexity as part of my research project. I've been playing with and using that one-on-one with clients to analyze stakeholder relationships for a number of reasons, and only when it's relevant. Because if there's no network or relational data of interest for that person's change, then it's not to be used. But if there is, so for example, if someone is talking about stakeholder relationships, they want to influence parts of the system in a more positive way, so they can influence rather than manage, for example, might be a common goal.
Yeah.
So it might be important to understand a systems theory of how things emerge in the system, and what are the interacting parts that lead to emergent processes and the atmosphere of what's going on in the organization. So you might inform that with a bit of systems theory. But what I've found is that often goes over people's heads a fair bit. So using network theory and social network analysis as a process of mapping the interrelated parts in a system. So in this example, it might be, so who are the key influences in the structure? You might map the complex relationships between them. That gives you a structure of relationships. You would do this physically. You might ask questions of people to gather the data, and then you can say, okay, where are key leverage points in this system that you might influence, change, adjust, or what does this pattern of the system tell you?
Yeah.
Right? So this does a couple of things. It actually is a practical methodology for looking at how we might change the system, what structure is important. Some structures are weaker than others. That gives a perspective that's useful,
Yeah.
but it also starts them thinking about more than just the dyadic, right? It starts them thinking about the embedded complexity of relationships in a system. That takes away or leads them often to a perspective on, well, it's not just someone who's causing the problem. You know, you often get this leadership perspective that it's their fault, it's someone else's problem. If I can only control enough, then everything will be fine. It gets them away from that because they can see the multiple relationships between things and how little changes can lead to often unexpected consequences. So then that takes away the need to control to a certain degree, and then it can start them thinking in network terms of relationships across a system, and also in systems terms in relationships across systems.
Yeah.
If you can give that perspective, they can include more in the decisions that they make and the type of interactions they have with that system.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's a bit different, I guess, but if it's relevant, then I would apply it.
There's one thing I didn't ask you about, was the ripple effect. So what's the causal mechanism in that?
Okay, so this was something that I've been trying to find in my research. I'm not sure I exactly found it, but I think that my theory was that if there's positive changes in a leader, that would lead to them interacting different in an environment, then therefore that would be experienced different from others. And if there was a big enough change across the system, that might lead to a ripple effect into the well-being of others. So what do I think? So my theory was that it was the ratio of positivity and negativity in interactions that was leading to the possibility of broader level change beyond just the individuals that were coached out into others in the system. The answer is still unknown, but it seems to be the case that while others might experience the coach differently, the coached person differently, the closer they are to that coached person, the more likely they are to experience well-being change outside of those that were coached.
Right.
So the more connected you are in terms of positivity from the coachee's perspective, the more likely that will lead to well-being change in others in the system. So I think it's a bit more complex than that. I think it's about the overall culture of engagement and process of engaging with positivity across the system that allows for emergent change in other people. How we map that is questionable. I think I've found some results, but I'm not.
Right.
I'm still working on that.
Right. What advice would you give to other people who want to combine positive psychology and coaching?
So combining positive psychology and coaching, what advice would I give? Well, make sure you understand the theory as much as you can. Look for specific evidence. Also try and get supervision if you can, because that will allow you to gain a more complex understanding of how you're integrating the theory and evidence with your practice. What other advice would I give to people? If you're just starting out, start out. Do it as much as you can, because by doing it and trying to apply all the new things that you're learning, you're gonna get off on a more positive foot more quickly. I think people wait too long to learn everything at a theoretical level before they start to apply that, and they miss some of the richness in understanding of the things that they're learning.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that enough for that?
Yeah.
There's probably other things there, but...
So any last comments, ideas?
Last comments or ideas? I mean, there is a lot to learn, and it seems very complex when you think about it this way around how you're trying to integrate everything. But that's the other thing I'd add to the last question as well. The importance of reflection and reflective practice as a coach yourself is key to understanding your own process. Whether you do that in supervision, you should also do it on your own. That really enriches your learning and speeds it up a lot. So, other comments, I mean, it seems like a lot to take in when you think about all the different theories and different evidence and different approaches that you can take and how you integrate them with the client's specific context, and how you go about making sense of those with the client and making sure you're applying the right interventions that will help for that individual. But really, I mean, once you start to get a grasp of the connections between some of the theory and practice, it starts to become more fluid, but only with practice. Yeah. So I think it's about holding that complexity lightly and being trying to get as comfortable as quickly as you can with the process is probably the key.